Trek Profiles Podcast, episode 52, recorded March 2021. This is the Trek Profiles podcast, where each episode we talk with a Star Trek fan, we hear their fandom story, and we try to figure out why they love this show so much. I'm John, your intrepid host of this whole enterprise, and I welcome you to this, the Trek Profiles podcast, episode 52. If you wish to get in touch with us, you can reach us at feedback@trekprofiles.com or on Facebook or Twitter at TrekProfiles. Warning, as we record this, we have reached the end of Season 3 of Star Trek Discovery, so all previous Trek content up to and including that point is fair game and may be discussed on this episode. You have been warned, humans. As always, my trusty sidekick and co-host is the fervently facile, fiendishly fulgurious, but never flighty M5 Multitronic unit. Say hello, M5.
M5 at full power.
Show me the announcements and news.
Accessing.
The Trek Profiles podcast is an independent show. If you'd like to support us, the best way to do that is to make sure that you are subscribed. We are on all the places where you can get your audio. All right, real talk for just a moment, ladies and gentlemen. This episode is labeled as explicit. I wasn't sure if I had to do that or not, honestly, and the rules for what explicit are not exactly clear, so I decided to take the super cautious route and label the episode that way. All of the material that might have earned that, however, is in the bonus material. There is nothing in the main interview that is of any concern. However, my guest was involved in the writing of some sci-fi related adult films, and he talks about his experiences doing that in the bonus material. Now, there's nothing particularly prurient in there. There are no curse words or anything like that, but he does mention the names of a few of the films, and they are about what you might expect. So if that concerns you, you are clear to listen to the interview, enjoy it, and just skip the bonus material. Make good choices, people. As repeat listeners will know, I end every interview with 5 multiple-choice speed round questions that my guest must answer. And as a listener to this fine program, you may submit questions for possible inclusion on the show. And if you get one on the show, you'll get a credit in the episode and on the related show notes page over on Trek Profiles. So check that out if you have an interest. And now let's move on and review the questions from episode 49 with Ben Robinson. Which class is best, Miranda or Oberth? Ben said Miranda class, best class, and in the poll it also crushed the opposition by 89 to 11%. It's your birthday. Do you have pineapple cake with Malcolm Reed or a 7-layer Jabalian fudge cake with Kes? I guess pineapple was not the favorite of anyone except poor Malcolm. Kes and the fudge cake was victorious, and selected by both Ben and the audience, the poll came out to 62 to 38% in favor of Kes and the chocolate cake. Which cat is on your lap, Spot or Grudge? And Grudge was proclaimed the queen in this poll by both my guest and the audience. In this case, the poll was 63 to 37%. Yow. You're taken captive and will be interrogated. Which would be worse? A week with Gulma Dread or a trip to Cold Station 12 with the Augments? Ben and the audience agreed it would be Gulma Dread. And in this case, the poll was 77 to 23%. And finally, in a head-to-head battle to the death, which ship would hold the edge? A Klingon Vorcha-class cruiser or a Romulan D'Deridex-class warbird? And in this final question, both Ben and the audience agreed that the warbird would be victorious. The poll was somewhat closer than you might expect, though, at 54 to 46%. That's it for messages, announcements, and communiques. Let's move on. M5, let's start the show.
Commencing transmission.
His favorite character is that original Captain Kirk, and his favorite ship is that TOS USS Enterprise 1701, no bloody A, B, C, or D. He's from the Los Angeles area, California, North America, Earth, in Sector 001. It's Star Trek author Marc Cushman. Welcome, Marc, and thanks for being on the podcast.
Hi, John. My pleasure to be here.
Marc, I always have to start with question one, which is, are you a Star Trek fan?
Absolutely. I've been a Star Trek fan since 1967. I was 1 year late getting on board.
And how old were you approximately at that time?
maybe 10, 11.
Okay, and you started watching it on NBC, I guess, in live broadcast.
I did. I was a little late because I lived on a dairy farm in Oregon near Tillamook, and we didn't get NBC during most of the year. So all the other kids were watching it. The teacher was watching it. The teacher would say, "You have homework tonight," on a Thursday. There'd be a big moan in the room, and she'd say, I know, it's Star Trek night, no homework." And I didn't know what Star Trek was, but I thought, this is incredible. And then during the summer, during the repeat season, Channel 8 from Portland started to fizzle in, and I was able to watch the first episode I saw was Devil in the Dark, through a snowstorm, grainy, but enough to get what was going on. And I thought, oh, this is a hell of a lot better.
Not a physical snowstorm, but a staticky snowstorm because of the reception.
Static.
Yeah.
And it would come stronger and get weaker, but I saw the whole episode, and I thought, this is way better than Lost in Space or Voyages Beyond the Sea. And within, I think the next episode I saw was Arena with the Gorn, and at that point I was officially a fan.
And you've stayed up with Star Trek ever since?
Yeah. It became an addiction when I was young, 12, 13, 14, 15, watching it on the network, and then when it first went into reruns, and couldn't get enough. I was getting the paperback books that James Blish was writing. I was getting the comic books from Gold Key. And then
those Gold Key comics were very different. Very different.
Yeah. And, but you had pictures on them. You had pictures on the inner covers and on the back for those first few issues. And I thought it was terrific. And I'd been watching Star Trek in black and white up there on the dairy farm. That was our TV set, family TV set. And so when I got that first Gold Key comic book, I got to see what color the uniforms were. And that was just eye-opening.
Oh, certainly quite a revelation when you didn't have it and then suddenly getting to see it that way.
Yeah.
I also watched some Star Trek on a black and white TV because I used to go to my granddad. I grew up in New York City, and he lived in the apartment right across the hall. And so I used to go over there and watch Star Trek on his TV, and he only had a black and white. So that's all I got to watch it into. So it's amazing in this world of streaming how everything's always available. And I've talked to many people on this show that never had that experience.
Did Granddad get into it?
No, it was just something for me. But he didn't mind. He just let me have my way. He liked Westerns and stuff like that, but Star Trek wasn't for him. Spaceships and all that, not his bag.
It too. Yeah, my entire family got into it, and my father especially liked it, and he liked Westerns too. But outer space and Westerns are not that much different, really.
No, they're not when you get down to it. Yeah, but I think some people look at the accoutrements, the horses and all that, and sort of he was kind of in that mindset.
Yeah.
But thematically, certainly very similar. Okay, so the show was in reruns, and then, of course, there's a long history of Star Trek coming out in dribbles and drabs. We have the animated series in there. We have the first movie, of course, which is I am a big fan of, and I take a lot of flack for that online, but I'm a big fan of motion picture.
I love the first movie. The first movie is my favorite of all of them.
Okay, fantastic. And so you've watched all of it as it's come out?
Yeah. And, when I first saw the motion picture in 79, it was a little slow. I remember I walked out of the theater a little disappointed because it didn't quite have the pacing of the hour-long TV episodes. But after I watched it a few more times, I really got into it. It's a very deep story. I mean, 3 lead characters going through midlife crisis at the same time, Kirk, Spock, and V'ger, and all coming together. And that eternal question, is this all I am? Which all 3 of them were asking. And so I just found it, like a lot of the episodes of the original series, to have great depth to it and very poignant. I loved Wrath of Khan. I loved The Voyage Home. They were way more fun, but they didn't touch me as deeply as the first movie. And I watched it not that long ago when I was doing this latest book, the 6th book, which covers the production of that movie. And I watched it a few more times during that period. And for me, it holds up, if not better. The older I get, the more I appreciate the movie.
Oh, good. Well, I'll want to talk more about the books in a bit, but first I just want to cover your history with Star Trek a little bit, Mark. So, as we sit here in early 2021, there's approximately 800 hours of canonical Star Trek between all the TV shows, cartoons, and films. What percentage of that do you think you've seen?
Well, I've seen the 80 hours of the original series. I've seen all the movies with the original cast and several of the other movies, and I've seen probably about half of Next Generation and a sampling of all the other series. So I would say we're looking at a couple hundred hours at least.
All right, very good. Do you have it within you to commit to becoming a completist at some point and seeing all of it?
No.
Oh, so that was a very quick answer. So tell me what's going on.
Yeah. Well, just because a corporation stamps Star Trek on something doesn't mean to me it's Star Trek. I've never seen a Star Trek I didn't like. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't mean I love them all.
Okay.
But I love all the original series episodes. As Bob Justman used to say, even the much aligned Spock's brain. You know, I'm always surprised when I run into a Star Trek fan of the original show, and they'll start nitpicking particular episodes for whatever reason. My feeling is there's only 79 of them. You should love them all. And you can love some more than others. But I love them all, and I've watched them all repeatedly over the years. And the same goes for the movies with the original cast and the other shows. I would sample them, and I watched a good chunk of Next Generation. I thought it started off, it stumbled a bit, but it got better as it went on. Mm-hmm. I think each of the sequels was not quite as good as the one before in most cases, but they're still good. You know, I think even the most recent ones are still good and worth watching.
So I've been on record on the podcast before, and I will take this opportunity to be on record again, saying I think Spock's Brain is a perfectly fine episode of Star Trek. And I don't think there's anything wrong with it, and it's delightful and fun.
It is. And, you know, Gene Roddenberry and Gene Kuhn came up with that story, sitting in the office watching the news, because they always watch the news because so many of those episodes were based on what was happening at the time. Mm-hmm. And the first heart transplant had just happened. And people were out protesting in the streets saying man does not have the right to play God and take an organ from one body and put it in another. And especially an organ that we think is part of your soul, you know, your heart. And so there was a lot of pushback on that. And the two Genes looked at each other, and one of them, and Roddenberry told me he thinks it was him. He looked at Gene Kuhn and he said, we should do something with this. You know, but 300 years from now, heart transplant's not going to be any big deal.
Right.
What would there be left to transplant that could be really interesting? And Gene Kuhn looked at him and said, what about the brain? So see, even the episodes that weren't that strong came from, were really heavily inspired, and great thought went into them. So I agree with you. I think the episode's fine.
Yeah, I think there's a recipe there that you hit on, which is that one of the things that makes Star Trek great is that they were taking the timely and turning it into the timeless, so that the episodes actually hold up, you know, because they didn't make it about things that were happening in 1967 so much, right? Because otherwise, and not that they were thinking of this, of course, mm-hmm. but they just put it into like there's an abstraction layer of science fiction on top of it. So that, you know, 20 years later, you look back on it and it's a fine episode. You don't have to have access to what was going on in the news in 1968 to enjoy it and appreciate it. I'm not talking about that episode in particular, but just in general. Okay, so you've watched some of Star Trek. Are you a collector at all, Mark? Have you, in all your travels, have you been buying any Star Trek merchandise or just acquiring things along the way, even with your involvement in the show?
In a very minor way, I used to be. I got all the first dozen or so comic books. Mm-hmm. I got all the James Blish books. I got many of the first books that came out, Alan Asherman's book on Star Trek and so forth. And but, you know, being in the business that I'm in and having worked for the different shows and known Gene Roddenberry and Justman and Dorothy Fontana and all these mm-hmm. people and done these books now, I would get a lot of stuff. And so I would start giving it away to other people that I thought could appreciate it more.
Nice.
Yeah. Because, see, I learned after a while it's going to go into a box or it's going to go into storage. And I thought, you know, maybe if I know somebody who could really appreciate this, where it would be out there. For instance, I have a clapperboard from one of the episodes.
Nice.
And that's right here in the living room. You know, I'm up in a cabin up in the mountains. Got out of LA for the pandemic, but
Sure.
been up here working on books. But I've got that clapperboard over there by the television set, and Ralph Sineski's the director, and so forth. So it's you know, certain things are very special, and those are going to be on the wall. You know.
Yeah,
If it's going to go into a drawer, I finally gave away my comic books, the original Gold Keys, because they were down in the basement in a box.
Yeah.
And had been down there for decades. And so I took them out and looked at them and touched them and said, "This is cool." Remembered getting them at the age of 12, and but then I gave them to a friend who I thought could enjoy them more, and he did. He would call me up and say, "Man, I love these things," and he'd talk about the stories that he was reading, and he would talk about the ads in the back and the pictures and everything, like I felt when I first went through them. And I thought, well, this is way better than them being in a box. Let them live. Let them get passed along. So I don't have as much as I used to answer your question.
Oh, well, we're actually in the same boat there, Mark, I got to tell you, because I actually, as we record this, I had just run a contest for my listeners where they were submitting things to the show, and I gave away 4 prizes, and it was all loot from my own collection.
Yeah.
And I had things in there like autographed photos with certificates of authenticity from Star Trek actors. I had Star Trek books. I had toys, dolls. I mean, all kinds of stuff, you know, and it was, each person got a huge box, and one of them contacted me and said, "I can't believe you're giving this stuff away. Like, this is a lot of stuff, you know?"
Yeah.
And I said, "Look, you know, it's just, I'm not much of a collector. I mean, in the recording here, in the video, you can see behind me, some of my most treasured stuff is hanging up on the wall. You know, I have a piece of Spock art here. I've got a original piece of Klingon art. I got some stamps, you know, that are hung up, but I don't have all that much stuff. It gave me more pleasure to give that stuff away than it did to have it sitting in a box in the garage."
Yeah, the big collection I have right now is from the original series, all the memos, all the ratings, all the production schedules, and they take up several filing cabinets.
Goodness.
And I got those for researching the books I was writing. And Gene Roddenberry gave quite a bit to me. Bob Justman, Dorothy, John D.F. Black, they were all giving me materials, and then I was allowed to go in the vault and raid that, make copies of anything I wanted. So I've got this massive collection of all these memos, a folder about that big, for each episode. And that doesn't count the scripts and treatments. I got another folder that big with the different drafts of the scripts and treatments for each episode. So I guess we could call that a collection.
That is absolutely a collection. Yeah. If it pleases you and it's part of what you consider to be your Star Trek collection, then that's what it is.
Yeah, I got it for work to do these books, but I'm keeping them. You know, and it's not that I pull them out and read. There's so much. It's a mountain. But I did tell my son, I said, "Listen, when I drop dead, don't throw these away. You don't have to keep them. You can put them on eBay and sell the entire collection, thousands and thousands and thousands of pages. But this stuff should go somewhere. It's the history of the original series. So that's my big collection right now."
Wonderful. We're going to talk more about that in a few minutes, but I got just a couple of other little bits and bobs to ask you about, which is that you're of an age to have been around when Star Trek and sci-fi conventions were first really becoming a thing.
Yeah.
Did you ever attend one?
The first one I attended was in 1974 or 5, I think, 1975 in San Francisco in the Bay Area. And I was actually sent there to deliver film of several episodes that they were going to be screening. And that was, and that's the first time I met Arlene Martell. She was there with the ears and everything, looking beautiful.
Oh, of course.
And we later became friends. And I met Walter Koenig and James Doohan and George Takei and Nichelle Nichols. I don't think Shatner and Nimoy were there. I met them much later, but that really stuck in my mind. And then I went to one on my own as a civilian a few years later in LA. And then I was sent out to Vegas when these books came out, and I went to 4 or 5 of them consecutively, which is the biggest of the conventions in Las Vegas in August each year. So I went to several of those where I had a booth and we were selling books and so forth. So I've been to about 8 in my lifetime. And I got to tell you, I'll tell you real quick, because my publisher went with me to Vegas the first time we went out there. And they had a booth, and he wanted to come get it all set up for us. So he was out there, and that's Robert Jacobs. And he knows Star Trek, but I never got a sense that he was a big fan or had watched a lot of it. He just knew it like just about everybody knows it, knew it was of quality. But he came over to me at one point during that convention, and he just walked up and he said, I have never met so many nice and interesting people in my life all in one place. I mean, he was just stunned. And that's the same impression I got each time I went, for whatever reason I was there. And you just meet such incredible people from all over the world. And if anybody, we used to get pegged as us guys, as geeks. You're into science fiction, you're geeks, and there'd be old jokes about, who's at a science fiction Star Trek convention, 10,000 guys and one girl. Not true. If you've never been to a Star Trek convention, my God, I've never seen so many beautiful women in my life, all in the different uniforms from the different series. You can tell which series they're into from the way they're dressed. And just lovely people, bright people from all around the world, and pretty much equal between male and female, I find. So I was very surprised by it and really had a good time.
Oh, that's great. I mean, one of the things I always like to point out, especially to the younger fans, is that the original fan movement was originally driven by some very key women.
Yeah.
Who really put the whole thing together, and it's not just B.J. Trimble, of course, she was in there, but there was Sheila Comerford, there was the Welcome Committee. I mean, there was like all these different organizations that were by and large run by women that really brought the fandom into what it is. And so let's just acknowledge.
Winston was another. Joan Winston was one of those from 1967.
Yeah, right back to the 60s.
Pictures of her on the set with the cast in the transporter room, standing on the plates, and so it was the first, really the ones who broke through for the fandom were all women. You're right. I didn't think about that.
So let's talk about how you got to be involved with Star Trek. So you were watching the show, you were a fan of it, and at some point you decide to begin your professional career. And so how did young Mark growing up end up contributing a story for Star Trek? Walk me through that.
Well, Star Trek really was a major incentive for me to want to become a television writer. I'd always had a good imagination. And back then, in those old days, they'd show a 1-minute trailer at the end of the episode for next week's show. And you'd have to wait a week to see it. And I would construct a 1-hour episode around that 1-minute trailer that I'd seen. And then the next week watch and see how close I came. So I was exercising my creative muscle doing that, daydreaming. And then I started writing scripts, and the first sample script I ever wrote was for Star Trek. I was 16 or 15. I was in junior high. Submit it. I was just a kid, but I gave it to my English teacher, and he bumped my grade up a notch because of that script. He was really surprised by it. So it helped inspire me to want to become a television writer. And I wrote for several shows, not Star Trek, but Mannix and different TV series. But then I met Gene Roddenberry in 81 or 82, and I interviewed him for a production company in Los Angeles that was doing a special on Star Trek that I worked for. And then later, when Next Generation came on, we'd become friendly, and we would exchange holiday cards and things like that.
Sure.
And so later on, I contacted him to see if I could come in and pitch. And he said, sure. And I came in and I pitched the episode Sarek to him, to Gene. And that would have been around, it was in between the first and second season of Next Generation, whatever year that would have been, probably around 88, I think.
Yeah, 88, 89, something like that. Yeah.
The episode didn't get made until the third season because Gene had a change of heart about it. Because I said, I want to bring Spock's father, Sarek, into this show. And he's a Vulcan going through senility. And Gene liked that idea. But then he later had second thoughts about whether it should be Sarek or not. So it kind of sat around for a couple years until Mike Pillar reactivated it and said, let's definitely do it with Sarek and get Mark Leonard to come in. So that was how I managed to pitch a story to Star Trek.
Wonderful. Now, at some point, you decided to get into writing these, I would call them sort of the authoritative history of the production of Star Trek.
Right.
And so tell me how we get from I pitched a story and I have a story credit on the show to I'm now the archivist in chief of all things original series production. What's the story in between there?
You know, I had several get-togethers with Gene, been to his house a few times at that point, and I pitched to him over at Paramount, but I'd been to his house a couple of times prior. And I told him that I really loved the book, The Making of Star Trek, which had come out in
Stephen Whitfield book.
Yeah. And it came out while the show was in production. So mostly focused on the 2 pilots. And I love the fact that there was all these chunks of memos in there and production reports. I learned a lot about how to get involved in television and how to make TV from that book. It was almost like a college course in itself.
Right.
And I said, have you saved the memos and the production reports for all the episodes or just these pilots? And he said, no, we got them all. And there was like 45 boxes. And I said, I would love to turn that into a book. And he said, go at it. And he gave me access to everything. And he gave me a lot of materials. And he gave me copies of all the scripts. He gave me several interviews. He connected me with John and Dorothy and Bob and so many other people. And I ended up over a period of several years interviewing all the writers and directors who were still living and guest stars and cast and regular cast members and production crew, just everybody I could track down who had worked on the original show. Plus I had all that printed material.
So one quick question.
Yeah.
Roughly what year was that Gene gave you the go ahead?
Mid-'80s.
Mid-'80s? Okay.
Yeah, but before I went in and pitched Sarek.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. I did the interview back in like 82. It was probably mid-'80s that I talked to him about that, and he said, do it. I knew I wouldn't be able to do it right away because I was getting pretty busy as a TV writer, but it was just something I wanted to do on weekends in my spare time and gradually work towards doing a book and figure out how to do it, really. Because these books are very unlike any other books that you've read about a TV show, because they're filled with all these memos and the production schedules and the ratings. And so each episode is brought out in that degree and all connected together. They create a bigger arc to the story of the making of Star Trek. So I just started interviewing people throughout the 80s and the 90s. And it was in the early 2000s when I finally sat down and started writing the books. And the first one came out in 2013.
So this is, let's see now, mid-'80s, right? So we're talking, this is 20 years now, over 20 years of actually working on these books. Yeah.
And my publisher made a big deal about that. You know, the book's 20 years in the making when the first one came out. And then the second one came out the following year, and then the following year, the third one came out, and now we're up to 6. But it wasn't 20 years of full-time work, you know.
Yeah. There was other stuff you were doing, for sure.
Yeah, I was writing hundreds of TV scripts, and I wrote another book that was published first on I Spy, because that was a show that I enjoyed when I was young, but also a show that I thought was a pioneering show. It was the first one to cast a white and a black actor equally in starring roles. And the first time a black actor won Emmys for a leading role in television, and the first show to shoot around the world. So I thought, well, this will make a good book. And I knew Bob Cope, and he introduced me to Bill Cosby, and on. And so I just started interviewing people, and that one came out first, which was good because that kind of showed me the way to do the Star Trek books. I would have been afraid to start with the Star Trek books because I had so much material. So I had to do something as a sample first, just to see how I could put all that kind of stuff together. And it got really good reviews and good reactions. So then I knew I was on the right track, and I went forward and did the Star Trek books after that.
So you would not remember this, but we actually met at the Star Trek convention here in Las Vegas because I was one of those people walking around the convention, and I actually bought the books from you, and you had autographed them and personalized them and sold them to me. So I have them right here, the ones that you had originally signed for me. So I still have those.
You're one of those bright and interesting people I was talking about.
You're buttering me up, are you? Okay. So, so I want to, as someone who's actually read all 6 books that are in this series right now, I really see them as a reader. There's really 2 different phases of the books as I would describe them. There's the sections of the book where you're talking about a show that's in production, right? Whether it's, TOS or animated series or the movies. And you're giving us an analysis of how that thing got made, what the issues were, what the problems were, what the data whatever archival material you had, memos, and who was involved in throwing different things into the pot, and who was stirring the pot, and who was trying to throw out the pot, and there's a lot of drama and a lot of sort of human stories in just the production of the show. The second part is sort of your sort of Hollywood history of Star Trek and the people in it, in a way. So like there's all this stuff that you talk about, like that you cover very carefully and with a lot of detail, all the reporting that was done on Star Trek. And here's what was in Variety about Star Trek. And here's what was in the LA Times. And, here's what Jimmy Doohan was doing in 1973. And, a lot of sort of detail about the people involved in the show throughout it for people who haven't read it. So I just want them to kind of understand what it is. And I got to admit, Mark, in some cases, I felt like I didn't want to know. And let me give you an example of what I'm talking about.
Sure.
I once bought a book from a bookstore that I just thought would be fun to read, and it was a book on script writing. And I think I've talked about this on the show in the past. And on page 1, paragraph 1 in this book on how to write scripts, which I didn't want to write, I just thought it would be interesting to read this book. It says, do not read this book unless you want to be a screenwriter, because I'm going to show you all the hack things to do to make a script producible, the shortcuts you can take, and it's going to ruin TV for you because I'm going to show you these things and then you're going to see them in scripts and you're not going to be able to, you're going to see them in shows and it's going to ruin your ability to enjoy them.
Right.
And as I got into some of the production elements of some of these episodes, I got to say it really sort of sticks a pin in sort of the mystery of Star Trek in a way.
Right.
And I don't mean this as a criticism in any way of the work that you did, but for instance, like we have to talk about the alternative factor.
Mm-hmm.
So why don't you give us a thumbnail sketch of the behind the scenes drama of the making of this TOS episode? Because I don't want to steal your thunder and try to recite back to you what you wrote in your own book.
Sure. Well, first of all, let me respond to your comment.
Sure.
I totally get that. And the first time when I was a kid and my parents took me to Universal Studios for the tour,
mm-hmm.
and I got to watch them filming some stuff, as we all did, from the buses and all that, and got to see that they were shooting an episode of Wagon Train, and they're on a stage, and they got the backdrop of the mountains and the trees and everything, and they've got trees that they brought in that are cut off at the 10-foot mark up there.
Sure.
And fake snow on the ground. And I remember seeing that and thinking, I'll never be able to watch Wagon Train again, or any Western or anything, because I'll be noticing what's not real. But it only really affected me that way for a few weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was able to do kind of an out-of-body thing where when I'm watching a movie or television, I'm able to watch it as a movie or as television and get into the story. I'm not looking at the lighting. I'm not looking at little things or seeing if I see a jet up in the sky when you're watching Stagecoach, like a lot of people notice. I don't do that. I get so absorbed in the story that I'm not worrying about spotting the tricks, the sleight of hand tricks.
I gotcha.
But I do know that not everybody can do that. And so I had a lot of people who'd come up to me at these conventions and say, this is my concern about reading these books. And I thought, well, maybe you shouldn't. Maybe you should skip these, because these are, if you want to know what went into making this stuff.
Right.
And then you might be able to appreciate it more. But if you're of the type that it's going to spoil it for you, then yeah, you don't want to read those. So they're not for everybody. That's for damn sure. Now, to give your audience an example, if they haven't read the books, you asked about the alternative factor. Well, see, when I watched that episode, I thought, why isn't this working? Because the episode produced right before it, 1 week earlier, was Arena,
which is great,
and it worked beautifully.
Yeah,
in every way. And this one was shot a week later at Vasquez Rocks, like the first one, and on Stage 9 back at Desilu, with the same people, the same cast, the same producer, Gene Kuhn, the same executive producer, Gene Roddenberry. They were both written by professional writers. They were both directed by directors who had done other episodes and would go on to do other episodes. So why did one episode suck? And I love it. As I said, I love them all, but that's probably my least favorite, even below The Way to Eden. You know, that is probably my least favorite episode because
don't be a Herbert, Mark.
It's kind of a mess, you know. And so what happened? Well, what you read the book and you find out they had John Drew Barrymore, who was going to play Lazarus. Now he was a big name,
yeah,
and they were happy to get him. That's Drew Barrymore's dad, and the son of the great stage actor John Barrymore. And he was doing a lot of TV and had done quite a few movies, and so he was a big catch for them. And the episode was going to feature the first interracial love scene and kiss, which actually didn't happen for another 2 years, and it happened in Plato's Stepchildren on Star Trek. But this was going to be the episode where they were trying to do that first in the first season. And they cast Janet McLaughlin to play the other character. So what happened was NBC didn't know that Janet McLaughlin was black. They thought she was a Scottish girl, you know, with that name. And they certainly
she was not
Barrymore.
known. Yeah, she wasn't known to them. She was young in her career at the time.
Because she had only done stage work. And she was starting to get a good reputation on the stage, but she had done very little TV. So they didn't know who she was at NBC, which was the most progressive network out there. It was the network that was doing I Spy and so forth. But they have to take care of their Southern affiliates too. And so they see the script where Lazarus is wooing this crewman to get the dilithium crystals from her, which is why Scotty's not in that episode, because he couldn't woo Scotty. So they had to bring in that character of her character. And the day before they were supposed to start filming, NBC found out that she was black and there was going to be a kissing scene in there. So they called Star Trek, and Stan Robertson, who was black, but he's got to do his job. He called Gene Kuhn and said, you got to take that out. You got to take all the love stuff out of there. I don't think the Southern affiliates are ready for a white guy wooing a black girl and then making romance and all that kind of stuff. So you have to take that whole subplot out, or get rid of the actress and put in a white girl. And Gene Kuhn wasn't going to do that. You know, he was very civil rights minded. He had a black secretary there at Star Trek too, and so forth. And so he said, I'm not going to fire her because she's black. Are you kidding? So he rewrote the script the night before and took all that stuff out. So John Drew Barrymore is in there the next morning in makeup, and they say, here's the new script. We had to rewrite it. He starts reading it and says, this is not what I agreed to do. This is nowhere near as good. And I don't get to kiss the girl. Screw this. And he got up and he walked out and didn't come back.
And he was under contract. He had signed papers. I mean, he was obligated to do the acting at this point.
He ended up, Herb Solow took action against him. Joe D'Agosta, the casting director, told me he was heartbroken because he had to go in and give testimony. And he didn't blame John Drew Barrymore for walking out. The script was nowhere near as good. And he's got his reputation to think about too. This isn't what he signed on to do. But they took action against him, and he was suspended by SAG, Screen Actors Guild, and couldn't work for 6 months. And it contributed to his career spiraling down and him getting into drugs and everything else. So it impacted his life terribly, this incident that happened that none of us knew about.
It's a tragedy.
But what happened on the set was they're ready to film. They've lit the set. They're ready to start rolling in an hour, and their star just walked off. So they're all in a bit of a panic. What are we going to do? Shatner comes over to Roddenberry and he says, a buddy of mine, Robert Brown, I did a pilot with him a couple years ago. He's a damn good actor. And he's kind of coming up. He's starting to get known. And he's not working today because it's his birthday. And I just talked to him a little while ago to wish him a happy birthday. He's at his house. They're throwing a party for him today. And he doesn't have any work the next week. You could grab him, and he's good. So they called him, and Robert Brown came out, thinking he was coming out for an audition on a show he'd never heard of. It had only been on for a few weeks. He hadn't seen it. And he comes out there, and Roddenberry puts his arm around him and says, here's the script, and he starts walking him to makeup. He says, we're going to put you in makeup. We've got you a motel room across the street because I know Malibu's a good 2 hours away with traffic. So if you want to use the motel room, you can. But we'll start shooting in a couple hours with you. We're going to shoot some other scenes first to keep busy. And he's going, what do you mean? I just came down to meet you. He says, no, here's the script. You can read it while you're in makeup. And so Robert Brown hadn't seen this thing. The beard had been made for John Drew Barrymore, which is why when you watch the episode, the beard changes throughout the episode. It's kind of a little thin and then it's a little thicker. But the script got gutted, and that's why we see Lazarus fall off the rocks so many times, because they reused that footage. They were just trying to pad it for the parts that had been taken out. And so it just was kind of like a domino effect. And the director was now under pressure to catch up and shooting out of sequence, which you do anyway in TV, but out of the sequence that they had planned to shoot. And we're behind schedule now. And we got an actor who's coming in who has just read the script. He hasn't really had time to study it. So it was just one of those things where everything is going wrong.
Yeah.
Well, I got to know that kind of stuff. When I watch an episode, I want to know why did this one turn out so good? Why did this one not turn out as good? Who were these people? Was this a big star at the time? I want to know all that kind of stuff. That's the way my mind works. And it doesn't spoil the fiction for me. I can watch that episode and get caught up in the story and the fiction at the same time.
One of the interesting notes that I recall from this, and I'm going on memory here, Mark, so I could be wrong, was that the panel of actors that was adjudicating the dispute was Carl Malden, Ricardo Montalban, Robert Culp, I think. And I think there was one or two others, and I just kept thinking, like, this is amazing that you would have all these people in the room with adjudicating this dispute, right? With John Drew Barrymore and Herb Solow giving testimony, and all of that. It's really something else. But when you kind of lift up the curtain and take a look behind there, you could see that there's a lot of insanity that went into the making of the show. And one of the things that I thought was particularly interesting for me was just as a fan who had paid a lot of attention to Star Trek and thought I knew about the history of the show, was that it seemed to me that there was an immediate interest as soon as the show went off the air to bring it back. I mean, there were all these different efforts that were happening, which you document very carefully about, different discussions that were had, different people who were involved. I mean, and you cover some of the other shows that Roddenberry was involved with and all of that, Questor and some of this other stuff that people can find out about. But it seemed like there were discussions almost right from the beginning.
Yeah.
And
starting in 1971. Yeah. That's when Mort Werner at NBC felt that maybe we could do a 2-hour Star Trek movie, because they realized very quickly after canceling the show in 1969, right after they gave it the pink slip, man walked on the moon. And suddenly there was a resurgence of interest across America in space travel. And then they also started looking at the ratings and realizing that the ratings really were pretty good. I mean, it was always in the middle of the heap, but it would win its time slot on Thursday nights. It was NBC's top-rated show on Friday nights during the second season. And even the first episode of the third season, Spock's Brain, at 10 p.m., won its time period. But it was always halfway down. It was always like around number 45 or 50 in the Nielsen ratings, with 90 shows on the air. So it was kind of in the middle. It could go either way as far as being renewed or canceled. And they canceled it because they were having too many fights with Roddenberry about story content, like the interracial kiss and things of that nature. So that was more of a factor than the ratings, as you can find out reading the books, because we put the ratings in there for each episode. So after they canceled it, almost immediately is when they started looking at demographics. And they realized, wait a minute, Star Trek was pulling in the very people we want the most, teenagers and young adults. They're the impressionable people who we can get them to buy this product. You can't get a 60-year-old to buy anything.
Yeah.
they're going to go buy a Buick because they've been buying Buicks their entire life, that type of thing. So they suddenly started thinking, my God, we really screwed up. We should have kept this show on for 10 years. And so they, in 71, going into 72, NBC had the idea to do a 2-hour movie. And Paramount said no, because they had scrapped all the sets. They had destroyed them.
Yeah.
They'd given away the Enterprise to the Smithsonian Institute. They were going to have to rebuild everything. And they said, we can't rebuild the Enterprise inside and out and make all the uniforms and all the props and all this stuff for a 2-hour TV movie. We'll never get our money back on that. We need a commitment for an entire season, a 2-hour movie plus 24 episodes, which is what they were doing at that time in 1970, 71. And NBC didn't want to do that. So then they said, we'll give you a half-year commitment, 13 episodes. And Paramount said no. And so this went back and forth for a few years, as you know from reading the book.
Yeah.
So NBC wanted Star Trek back pretty quickly. And what you probably didn't know, and most people don't know, is the reason we got the animated series in 73 is because that's the third year in a row NBC had come to Paramount asking for Star Trek back. And the third year in a row, and Paramount said no, because we're going to have to rebuild everything. And then they said, well, what if we do it in a way where you don't have to rebuild anything? An animated version. And get the original cast to come back, get Roddenberry and Dorothy to shepherd the scripts and the whole bit. And that's why we got the animated Star Trek, because NBC wanted Star Trek back and had wanted it back for a few years, but nobody wanted to spend the money needed to rebuild everything.
It seems to me that at several points, and this might be one of them, that the studio was penny wise and pound foolish in a lot of ways. I mean, one of the stories that struck me was I was reading about these two names that I had not heard of until I'd seen them in your book, and it was Chris Bryant and Alan Scott. And these two writers from England who were brought over to work on Star Trek, and as near as I can figure, the studio paid them to sit around for almost a year, sitting around watching Star Trek episodes and produce nothing. Yeah. But they paid these guys for almost a year of work with nothing to show for it. But yet they were very, very concerned about the small details of production and this and that, and nickel and diming the production. Yeah. But yet they were paying these guys all this money, and it's not even any fault against them. I think they had a lot of different directions. They were given a lot of conflicting directions from different people. So I'm not sure. I'm not assigning any blame here, but it just was an amazing story to me that these guys who had no experience with Star Trek were just paid to come over here from England and watch Star Trek for a year and produce nothing. Yeah.
Paramount was okay with Roddenberry running the show if it was for television, because he had done it before. They had butted heads a lot. They would love it if he would go away and somebody else would take over, but at least they knew he could do it. They knew he understood Star Trek where they didn't. Paramount never understood Star Trek. Really still doesn't. But when they decided in 75 to do a movie, and we didn't get it until 79, it took 4 years. They had Roddenberry write the script, and he wrote The God Thing, which they immediately rejected because, again, story content. They didn't like where he was going with it, the religion connections and all that. Barry Diller, who was running Paramount at that time, was a strict Catholic, and he didn't like what Roddenberry was doing in that script. So they rejected Gene's script. And then they rejected the second script with a form letter. Gene's supposed to be producing the movie, and he writes another script, and they send him a form letter saying, thank you, but no thank you. And then they start taking pitches behind his back. And this goes on for a year. Mm-hmm. And then they had a couple scripts written, nothing, but they always had problems with them. And that's when they brought in these two guys from England who had a buzz. They had just written a movie that they were brand new on the scene. I think they only had one screenwriting credit at that point, maybe two. And they were English films, but they were part of the buzz that you get in Hollywood when you're new and you're hot. Yeah. So Paramount decided, we got to have them. These guys didn't know Star Trek at all. So yeah, as you said, it took them a year to learn Star Trek. And then the story they came up with was not Star Trek. And it's almost painful to read. There's that one chapter in there called Down the Rabbit Hole. And this is in the fifth book, volume 2 of Gene Roddenberry and Star Trek in the 1970s. And you see the memos from Roddenberry where he's writing to them, trying to guide them into how to do this script, because he knows how to write Star Trek. They don't. And he's so kind in his notes, but you could tell he was probably just cringing, like, this is awful. And so he's trying to be pleasant, and he's telling them it doesn't work, and he's trying to be as nice as he can about telling them it doesn't work, but none of it works. And finally, Paramount figured that out too, and so they killed it. So then they decided they couldn't get the movie together. They had rejected all these scripts. This had been going on for 2 years, 75 and 76. So now in 77, Paramount decides, well, let's just do it as a TV show. And they had a 2-hour episode written, In Thy Image, which became Star Trek the Motion Picture. And they had 16 other scripts written, which I have all of them. That's part of that collection I was telling you about. And Roddenberry was going to produce it. They had the entire cast signed back to come back, except for Leonard Nimoy. Mm-hmm. And all the rumors at the time that he didn't want to do Star Trek weren't true. You find out reading this book that he wanted to do it, but he was committed to Broadway on a play that was going to run for 6 months to a year. And he said, if you want to hold off a year, I'll come do this. But they didn't want to hold off a year, so he wasn't going to be part of the show. And then 2 weeks before they were going to start filming, Paramount changed their mind yet again. After all these scripts had been written, Roddenberry had been working for a year putting this thing together. Paramount pulls the plug and says, let's take that 2-hour premiere episode and make it a motion picture. So it was just Paramount constantly changing their minds, constantly disrespecting Gene Roddenberry. He's drinking more. He's starting to take drugs. I mean, and you can understand. You read these 3 books, Gene Roddenberry and Star Trek in the 1970s, and by the time you get to the last one, mm-hmm. and I imagine you felt this way, John, as well, but I certainly felt this way, having lived in all these memos, my heart went out to him. I mean, he was just broken by the end of that process, mm-hmm. to where the final slap to his face was he didn't even get a screen credit on the movie as the guy who came up with the story idea and probably did more writing on the script and the treatments than anybody else. And he doesn't get a credit. So, and that memo he wrote to the Writers Guild, when they said they were leaning towards not giving him a credit after it went through arbitration. And he wrote back and he said, I just don't have the energy or the desire to fight this anymore. Don't give me a credit. But this is after 5 years of trying to get this movie made. He was just exhausted.
And I think he got he got his credit in a way by penning the novelization, for sure. He got to put his name on that, at the very least.
But it was his story. And you see from the different drafts that I include, or portions of drafts and the memos, when you read that book, you see who's doing most of the work. And I love Harold Livingston. You know, he's a character. I really enjoyed interviewing him, and I enjoyed interviewing the guy who got the story credit, Alan Dean Foster.
Alan Dean Foster, yeah.
Both terrific guys. But Gene gave Alan the story idea and then shepherded him through the writing of the treatment and rewrote the treatment. And then Gene assigned Harold Livingston to do the script when it was going to be a TV movie. But then Gene did most of the rewriting when it became a motion picture. And yet he doesn't get his name on there. It's hard to understand why. But, you know, I did talk to him about that. I talked to Gene about it. I talked to Harold and Alan about it. But, you know, Gene said, you know, the Writers Guild Arbitration Board wanted to see the first draft script and the last draft. Mm-hmm. They didn't want to see all the stuff in between. I mean, that script went through 20 drafts. So they're not seeing who's doing all this other writing. So they're making their decision with blinders, lack of information. If they had my book to read, I think they would have come with a different decision. But I was a little late in writing it.
when you dive into the history of it like you've done, you certainly see a different, you get a different flavor of what was going on behind the scenes than we get when we just look at the four corners of the screen or the movie screen when we just consume the show. I mean, one of the things that was also a revelation to me was the dispute between Nimoy and Roddenberry about the blooper reels.
Yeah.
It seemed to me, I mean, that was all new to me, right? And I'll remember Leonard's, I can't remember if this is something he wrote to him or something that he said, but to Gene, he was quite upset at the idea that they were using bloopers in the show. And so he said something like, how about I dig through your trash can for everything you've thrown out and try to sell it to people, right? He's like, yeah, I can't trust you, Gene, you know? And I think he had a point there. I think he had a point.
That was in a letter that Leonard Nimoy wrote to Gene Roddenberry, and it's in the book. You can read it.
Yeah.
And he has a good point. Now, as a fan of Star Trek, I love the bloopers, and I'm sure you do too, and anybody watching this does, and I'm glad that they're there. They're fun to watch. And they don't spoil the show for me any more than the information in my book spoils it. You know, I can still watch the show and not think about the bloopers and not think about the information in my book where you get to see how the trick is done. But Nimoy was a very serious actor, and he worked so hard to get that character right. Mm-hmm. And to know that, and he tried so hard never to smile when he was around cameras, and they were always trying to trip him up and get him to smile and laugh, and occasionally he would lose it, and there it is in the blooper reel. So that bothered him, and he made an excellent point when he said, "I want to go through your trash and take out the different drafts of scripts that you threw away." And show them to everybody. How would you feel? No writer wants the rough drafts shown to anybody, you know?
Yeah.
So he had a really good point, and you can understand how he felt. He took that character very serious. He took his work on Star Trek very serious, and he was very committed to Star Trek. And it also hurt him very badly that people thought he didn't like Star Trek because he wasn't going to be part of Phase 2 if it had gotten made. And it did seem like he was going to be part of a couple of the movies at first while they were negotiating things. He wanted to be part of all of them. He didn't want Spock to be played by somebody else. But there's business issues you got to take care of. There was all the merchandising that he wasn't getting any money for, nor was Shatner. And they were not happy about that. So it was like, Paramount, you're not giving us what we're owed, and you're asking us to come do another movie. Let's take care of this business first. We all want to do another movie, but let's take care of the business. Same thing with the animated series. He signed on, but when he found out they weren't going to bring Nichelle and George and Walter onto the show, and we're going to have other people do their voices to save money, he said no. He said, either everybody's on the show or I'm not doing it. So that's the ethic of Leonard Nimoy. He loved Star Trek, but he was loyal to his cast, his co-stars. And the public only saw what the studio chose to release as far as information. And it always made it seem like Leonard Nimoy was creating trouble. You know that one part in the book, I think it's volume 2 or volume 3, it would be volume 2 of these latest 3 of the 1970s, where Nimoy is talking about the letters he's getting, the angry, hateful letters.
Yeah.
And you can just hear the pain in his voice as he's reading these letters. And then he says, isn't that lovely? You know, of people just hating him because we hope your career goes down the toilet. We hope you die, you know, because there's rumors he's not going to be part of Star Trek. When really he wants to be part of it, it's just things need to be worked out first. Those letters really hurt him terribly. And you can see that.
Yeah.
You know, so that's what I feel good about with these books is that I think the more you know about Star Trek, the more you cherish it, because you find out how hard everybody worked and how much everybody cared. And that's why what you were saying earlier, John, about it holds up, because these were all talented people and they cared. Nobody was phoning it in, ever.
I think you made reference earlier to the fact that Gene and the studio were butting heads quite a bit. And at some point, the studio probably said, to use a modern phrase here, the juice ain't worth the squeeze. to argue this much to try to get a show produced, right? And so they just said, look, as much as we might like the show, it's a little too much.
Right.
And at one point when I was reading the books, I wasn't sure how I felt about that. But then I read about the show that Gene was trying to produce in the early 70s, the Spectre show, which I'm remembering right, you can correct me on this, was sort of this supernatural sort of show with a little bit of the occult in it. And some of the stuff that Gene was proposing, I mean, we're sitting here in 2021, but I just said to myself, there is no way that anybody was going to allow this on TV, what he had proposed. I mean, there was this scene with that basically suggests a supernatural ghost rape scene. And I mean, just this crazy stuff. And I was just thinking, Gene, I mean, you're working in television, man. How do you not know that they're going to shoot all this down? Why are you setting yourself up for this disappointment? It's almost like I'm reading it through with my fingers over my eyes saying this stuff is, pretty wild for public, for stuff you're going to want to put on the air in early 70s America on the major networks. And I almost came to see sort of the point of view of the studio that if you got to constantly rein this stuff in, my God, you got to put some very strong people on managing this guy, because this stuff can get away from you quick if you give him too much free rein. Am I wrong on that?
No. And that goes all the way back to the very early first season of the original series with the episode The Enemy Within. And each one of those episodes has its own chapter in the book, and you see the memos and the communications between Roddenberry and NBC. And Stan Robertson is saying in a memo to him, I believe, I don't have the book in front of me, but this is my recollection, is that you got to be really careful how you handle that scene where the bad Kirk tries to rape Yeoman Rand. Mm-hmm. It can't come off as an attempted rape on the NBC television network in 1966. And Roddenberry says, don't worry about it. We're going to handle it very discreetly. It's not going to come off that way at all. He's just getting a little frisky, and she has to slap his face and push him away. And we're teaching our audience that that's not any way to treat a woman. And then you watch the episode, and it's brutal.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really, you had never seen anything that stark on television before as far as sexual aggression. And the episode was winning its time period for the first half hour. And then that attempted rape happens, and it drops to number 3 in the ratings, because I've got the ratings reports in there for each half hour. And NBC writes him and says, we will not rerun this episode. Don't do that again. So the dividing line was created way back then. And you see this repeatedly with him bringing stories forward that NBC is going to have a problem with, and bringing forward movies like The God Thing, which Barry Diller would have a problem with. So when I say Paramount was disrespecting Gene Roddenberry, I treat Paramount the same way Star Trek treated aliens. Mm-hmm. An alien is not a monster. The Horta is not a monster. It's killing you for a reason. You're trying to kill its babies. So NBC and Paramount seem to be the villains in the Star Trek story, and in many ways they are. But they have reasons for what they're doing. And Roddenberry had reasons for what he was doing. And I asked him that very question, John, because it bothered me too. And I said, Gene, you were pushing the limit all the way. You did it on The Lieutenant. You did it on Star Trek. You did it with The God Thing. You created a situation to where you're not getting along with the studio. Why would you do that? And he said, I played by the rules for 10 years in the 1950s, writing cop shows and Westerns, and never gave them anything that would be a problem. Did over 100 scripts. And by the time I became a producer and started having to deal with NBC with The Lieutenant, and them telling me I can't do this story, I can't do that story, he said, the very reason I created Star Trek was so I could do these kind of stories, because it's taking place on another planet. And he was on a mission to bring things to television that we hadn't seen before. And he told me, he said, Mark, sex is a normal and a beautiful thing. And TV treats it cheaply and unrealistically. Violence is a very terrible thing. And yet TV makes it okay because they sanitize it. How many times do we see Joe Mannix get hit on the head or Marshall Dillon get shot in the shoulder? And kids watching this think that you can go whack your friend on the head with a toy gun and he'll be fine because they always get up on television.
Mm-hmm.
He says, no, they're going to have a concussion. They may have brain damage. They may be damaged for the rest of their life. And television is guilty for giving us this perception that you can do these things to the human body. He would be very upset with the new movies, the newer movies. They're not new now, but the J.J. Abrams versions.
Yep,
because look
the
at that
Kelvinverse films. Yep.
Yeah, look at the fight scene between Spock and Khan. It goes on for 20 minutes. And Spock is being hurtled through the air and slams up against a concrete wall and gets up and dusts himself up and goes back in for the fight. They're being treated like cartoon characters, like superheroes. Roddenberry would go nuts if he saw that. He would say, a Vulcan has bones. He's flesh and blood. Every bone in his body would be shattered if you threw him against the wall like that. He would not approve of what they've been doing. I enjoyed it. It was a very entertaining movie, but I can see that he would really have a lot of trouble with that. So I'm giving you long answers, I always do, but
it's okay, Mark.
Yeah, but to answer your question, I'm going to answer it as Gene Roddenberry. You got to ask Gene Roddenberry that question.
Mm-hmm.
And Gene Roddenberry is going to answer it because I asked him that question. And here's what he told me. So here's what he's telling you. That by the time he was doing this stuff, he was in his 50s. He had played the game for decades. He didn't want to play the game anymore. He wanted to write what he wanted to write. And if he never sold another TV script, fine. Not really fine. He wanted to sell them. But if it never happened again, he was okay with that. He'd go do books because at least in books, you can tell what you want to tell. And he was so offended by the studio's attitude and television networks' attitudes. He saw them as being irresponsible in the way they portrayed violence and sex. So he felt it was his mission to fight them, even if it was going to bring him down. That's the answer he gave me, and that's the answer he just gave you. I wouldn't do what he did, and you wouldn't. I'd continue to play by the rules because I like to work.
Mm-hmm.
And I like to know that millions of people are seeing my work, but he'd already done over 100 TV scripts. He had already produced a couple TV series. So he was at the point to where he'd been there, he'd done it. Now he wants to do it his way or no way.
So, Mark, the M5 is signaling me that we should talk about some episodes that are meaningful to you. And I noticed that you've given me an all TOS list. In fact, it's almost exclusively season 1 TOS, a little bit of season 2 and season 3, but certainly a lot of season 1. So let's go ahead and dive in and talk about some of these. Are you game?
Yeah. And you'll surprise me because I don't remember what I gave you.
That's okay. That's okay. Let's start with This Side of Paradise, season 1, episode 25. This, of course, is the one where the Enterprise crew finds happiness at this colony where alien spores are providing contentment. And we have the famous scenes with Mr. Spock and, of course, Layla Kalomi as well. So what about this particular episode is meaningful to you, Mark? Why did it jump out at you?
Any good writing, TV writing, movie writing, book writing, but any good writing, they always say is the reason it's called movies is because they move you if they're done right. And that is one of my favorites because it moves me so deeply. I mean, just look at that great line that Dorothy wrote for the end of the episode, where they're back on the bridge after they've been through all this. And Spock's quiet. He's always kind of quiet, but more so. And Kirk notices and he says, Mr. Spock, you haven't mentioned how you feel about everything that had happened or whatever his line is. And Spock looks at him and says, all I know, Captain, is for the first time in my life, I was happy. I can barely say that without getting choked up. It's such a great line. Nimoy delivered it so beautifully. And that's what writing is all about. And that's what movie making and TV making is all about. When you can have a moment like that, like Kirk at the end of The City of the Edge of Forever saying, let's get the hell out of here. And you know what he just sacrificed. I mean, that's not frivolous entertainment. That's the type of thing where that episode ends and you almost have to turn the TV off. You can't watch whatever's coming on next on BBC because you're so moved by what you just saw. You have to just turn off the TV and think about it. And there's another great scene in that episode where Kirk realizes how big the ship is because he's all alone on it. And he says that. So your two lead characters are both going through something so personal and so profound in that episode. And Dorothy wrote such a brilliant script. And to have a cast who can play those lines the way they did. The whole episode's wonderful. The premise, the fights, the plants, the spores, Geo Ireland, everything is so wonderful. There's not a bad moment in that episode, and it's filmed on location too. We get off of the sound stages, and that was the first episode I saw in color, and it was like, wow! I could see the uniforms, the green grass, and even the planet was green when the Enterprise was orbiting it. It was just beautiful. But there's such profound stuff in that episode that it stays with me to this day, that if I wanted to teach somebody how to write scripts, and I've been a teacher, a screenwriting teacher for college, I would hand them that script, and I would hand them that script and say, read this, and this is what you want to try to write.
One of the examples of this that jumps out at me is this story, and it might be apocryphal. I'm not exactly sure, but one of the things I've heard is that Hunter S. Thompson sat down at his typewriter and actually typed out the entire novel of The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. He just retyped it because he wanted to know what it felt like to write something that good, and he just felt that was a good exercise for him to do. You know, and I thought, wow, man, that's commitment. I don't know if I have it in me to do that kind of stuff, but he certainly did. Okay.
I did that when I was, I think 16.
Really?
And I was starting to write scripts. I got a hold of, and it was hard to get a hold of scripts back then. Now you can get them online. You can download them. You can go to places and buy them.
Yeah.
Like here in Hollywood, Script City. But back then you couldn't. But I got a hold of a script that I thought was brilliant, and I retyped it.
Really?
Just like you just said. I didn't know that story you just told me, but I did it because I wanted to experience every word so that when I wrote a script, I could hopefully write something close to it. And that was the process I went through. And it was an interesting experiment. And I would recommend that to people. Retype a script. It's interesting to do.
If you want to learn how it all works, it makes a lot of sense. So, all right, let's talk about another episode. One of the favorites of mine, certainly a personal episode that's very fun, is Shore Leave, TOS, season 1 again, episode 17. Here, of course, we have the infamous Kirk and Finnegan scenes. Yeah. We have Dr. McCoy with Don Juan, and we have all of this crazy stuff going on this planet, and they don't know what's happening. And of course, it all turns out that it's basically some sort of 23rd century Disneyland. So what about this episode is special to you, Mark?
Again, it's like This Side of Paradise. It's so creative, so imaginative, so much fun, so entertaining, and yet there's moments in that episode that are so remarkably profound, even sad. You know, when Kirk meets Ruth, and not expecting of all the people he's going to see, she steps out, and it's Ruth, and that beautiful music that was written for that episode during that sequence, and you just feel it. You feel the sense of loss that he lost this person in his life, and that she's not going to be able to stay. You know, it just told you, it told you so much about the character Kirk, that the loneliness he feels, the loneliness of command, of going out on these 5-year missions, and you can't have anybody waiting home for you. And so this was something that could have been in his life, but he had to choose his career. He chose his career instead of this person. But he almost looks, she's almost like a narcotic. There's this one scene in there where they call him and he opens up his communicator and they're having some problems, and Captain, we need you. And the reception's bad. And he says, I got to go. And look at Shatner. Again, what a brilliant actor he is. He looks like he's drugged by her. It's so hard to pull away from her, you know?
Yeah.
And I just felt all that. And that epic fight, I'd never seen anything that good on television before. And it's so realistic. They get exhausted. They can barely stand. They're so exhausted. You never saw that happen on a TV show before. It just went on, and it would slow down and it would pick up, and you felt it. I've never felt like I was being punched more than watching that fight, because you are in it with them. So again, I'm watching that episode like many of the Star Treks, but these are a couple that really did it for me, that I'm just thinking, this is telling me how to write. This is telling you how to act. This is telling you how to be a filmmaker. This is, you forget everything that's happening when you're watching this episode. You are so sucked into it. It's writing at its absolute best, acting at its absolute best, scoring at its absolute best. Listen to the score. And when McCoy dies, and again, look, Shatner should have won an Emmy for playing Kirk. Nimoy was nominated every year. Shatner never was. Look at Shatner when he comes and kneels down over McCoy's body. Look at the close-up of him when they cut to him. He looks like he's going to throw up. He looks like he's physically ill of the motion that's passing through him of kneeling over his dear friend, the person he's closer to than anybody on the ship, the only person he can confide in on the ship and reveal himself, is lying there dead. And he just kind of looks up and he's kind of shaking his head like, and you feel it. And again, I'm looking at that and going, this was shot in a week? You know? I mean, this is something that you would think would be like a motion picture, would have taken months to shoot to get these performances. And it's just filled with that throughout.
The two episodes we've talked about are This Side of Paradise and Shore Leave, and I think that those are often at top lists for people when they're talking about favorite episodes of TOS or very good episodes of TOS. But I'm surprised that this next one made the list because it's a little bit different, and that's Charlie X.
Oh. Certainly
a little bit different.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how it's in the same category as those other ones, so please explain yourself, Mark.
Because it moved me. That's the key. You know, talking about Shatner's reaction to McCoy dying, to being near Ruth, to being alone on the ship in This Side of Paradise, to Spock saying for the first time in my life, I was happy. Charlie X really resonated with me because I was maybe 15 when I first saw that episode. I didn't see it on NBC. I saw it when Star Trek started repeating in fall of 69, because I didn't see most of the first season due to that reception problem where I lived. And that's when I never saw until it reran. So I was maybe 15 when I saw it. And what do we all feel when we're 15, John? Us guys.
Crazy hormones, insanity.
Sick to our stomach half the time because there's some girl at school you just have a crush on, and she's probably a year or two older than you. And so it's a little more womanly. And she's not going to be interested in you. You're just some awkward 15-year-old. And whenever she's near you, you just feel sick to your stomach. And you're all thumbs. And you don't know what to say. And whatever you do say, you're going to beat yourself after she leaves because it was the dumbest thing to say. And I watched that episode, and there it is playing out in front of me. And Charlie is talking to Kirk when Kirk has to give him the father-son talk, you know? And he's saying, I just feel everything I do is wrong. And I feel sick to my stomach all the time when I'm around Yeoman Rand. And he says, Charlie, what you're feeling is something every male feels at your age since the model came out, you know? And I had never had that conversation with my dad or with anybody. But I'm Charlie, and there's Kirk giving a father-son talk to me as I'm watching that episode in the moment. It never occurred to me before I watched that episode that all my friends felt the same way, because it wasn't something I would go talk about. Gee, I feel like throwing up every time Marsha's near me. She's so beautiful. You know, you're embarrassed. You keep it to yourself. And here's Charlie confessing that to Kirk. You said I had to do some confessing when we started, and you're right. I'm confessing now. There's Charlie confessing to Kirk, and Kirk is saying the perfect thing. Who didn't want to have Kirk as your dad? You know, and I love my dad. My dad was great, but, you know, William Shatner, Kirk, I mean, that great dad. And so just that father-son thing. What's interesting, Dorothy Fontana didn't like that scene. Roddenberry wrote it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he rewrote her script and he added that scene in, and she said, it's always about sex with Gene. He had to go put something about sex in there. And I said, Dorothy, that scene meant so much to me at 15. That scene allowed me to realize that I was normal. And I was going to thank you, but I guess I need to thank Gene. You know, it was just a great scene, a great premise, but also at that age, you know, there's always a bully who's picking on you, unless you're the bully, and I wasn't. There was some bully who was always picking on me at school. And I remember thinking, I wish I could just make him go away.
Like use your Charlie X powers.
Charlie X did, yeah. Or little Billy Mooney in the Twilight Zone. Make him go to the cornfield. So that episode just really clicked with me.
Charlie X spoke to you as a teenager, as you were dealing with your own sort of teenage boy anxieties. Another episode that's on the list is Journey to Babel. Was this somehow about your relationship with your parents, or was there something else sort of biographical about this episode that drew you to it, or was there something else?
There was nothing on a personal level for me with that particular episode, because I had a good relationship with my dad. We didn't have the father-son talks that Kirk and Charlie did, but I had a good relationship with him, looked up to him. So I didn't have an estranged relationship with anybody like Spock and his father had. But it really enlightened me about how family can drift and be disappointed in somebody and never articulate why they're disappointed. And seeing Spock and his father connect at the end of that episode was very moving. You notice that it's a word I keep coming back to. Anything that's one of my favorites is something that moved me in some profound way. And again, such brilliant writing. Dorothy wrote that one, and I had conversations with her about this, and you know, I said, you did the great thing. And it's another episode I would tell my students to look at.
Mm-hmm.
I was teaching screenwriting, because I could talk about Star Trek. Because if I said to my students, how many of you have seen Schindler's List? One hand would go up out of 30. How many have seen Saving Private Ryan? One hand would go up. How many have seen Star Trek? Every hand went up. You know, that episode where everybody knew, no matter what age. And so I could use Star Trek as a teaching tool. And that was one of the scripts I would tell them to look at. Because I said, Gene told me, he used to always say, any story is about a character with a problem. The biggest problem they ever faced and an urgent need to make something happen or not happen. Watch Journey to Babel, or just about any Star Trek. But watch that episode. Spock, talking about being between a rock and a hard place.
Sure.
Kirk's been knifed. He's in sickbay. The ship is in danger. It's being followed. It's been attacked. There's an assassin aboard. He can't relinquish command. His duty says he has to stay there, but his father's going to die if he can't go give a blood transfusion. And I love it when Kirk gets out of bed, so much pain, but he goes to the bridge. Said, Spock, get out of here. I'm fine. Go take care of your dad. And the second Spock walks into the elevator and the doors close, Kirk almost collapses in the command chair. And he says, call Scotty. He's going to take over, let him take over. And you can tell how hard it was for him to come in there and do that. But he had to get Spock down there to save his dad's life. So, my God, this is the writing at its best, to use your characters this well and to have a dream cast like that who can play these parts so remarkably well. I mean, when I saw that in November of 1967, when it first aired, and when I last watched it a couple years ago, that episode holds up. It's powerful drama to the max. And we had never seen a smorgasbord of aliens like that on television, ever.
Right.
Or even on the big screen until the cantina scene in Star Wars 10 years later. They really gave us eye candy for that episode.
Yeah, they really did show us that the Federation was all these different sorts of people, right? And which was just glorious.
Look, we could do a whole show, as you can tell, just on any of the 3 episodes we talked about, or 4 episodes. I could go on for an hour with you talking about why those episodes are so good, and then want to just go watch them again. You know, that's how powerful they are.
As we record this, I've got almost 50 episodes out, and I've got some number, I want to say, between 5 to 7 that are in various stages of pre-production or production as we record this. And people send me these episode lists. The M5 comes up with episodes for us to look at. And a lot of times they're episodes that people know. There's episodes we've talked about numerous times on Trek Profiles. Then there's some that I look at and I think, this ought to be interesting. And so this is one of those. You have selected Spectre of the Gun. So this, of course, is the episode where we have the Enterprise comes across the xenophobic Melkotians who recreate sort of a Western environment. And we have the Clanton gang and a gunfight. And we have this really sort of abstraction of what happens on the planet. It's all very, very bizarre. I gotta know, how did this one end up on the list, Mark? Tell me what's going on.
I just always loved it. The first time I watched, I had mixed feelings because it wasn't typical Star Trek. But at the same time, by the time it was over, again, I had to turn the TV off. It didn't matter what was on NBC after Star Trek. I wasn't watching because I had to turn off the TV and just think about what I had just watched. And I just thought, boy, I can't wait to see that again. I wasn't sure I was liking it when I was watching it that much. It was just too bizarre. But then it's over, and I think, I can't wait to see that again. But I'm going to have to wait 6 months if they rerun it, you know? So I had to play it in my mind that night. But it is so bizarre, and I love that. I love that the Melkotians only have a fragmented view of American history. So they're only able to put up portions. They know what the outside of the building looks like, but they don't know what the inside looks like. So there is no inside. You know, the clock is suspended in space. That type of stuff I just thought was brilliant. I thought the creature was great. Earthlings. I thought the whole premise of you are disease, we have to keep you away, was fabulous. And what a shame a portion of the script didn't get in the episode because NBC didn't like it. Where the reason the Melkotians didn't want the Earthlings to come, the reason they saw us as disease is because they had been monitoring our television. but it had taken 200 plus years for the signal to get to their planet. So the TV they were watching right before the Enterprise shows up is 1950s American television, mostly Westerns, with all that violence that Roddenberry so deplored, you know? Bang, 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 just shooting people right and left. And the news and all that. And they're thinking, we don't want to have anything to do with you people. Well, NBC wouldn't let that scene go into the episode because they felt it's putting down network programming. And it was. But I've read the script. And so now it's like that scene is in the episode. You know, it's like I've seen the scene. I can visualize it as being part of the episode. So it only makes that episode all the richer to me because I know why the Melkotians fear humans so much until Kirk and Spock are able to prove to them that we've gone beyond violence. They didn't kill the Earps. They beat them up a little, but they didn't shoot them because they didn't need to. And that's when the Melkotians went, okay, you're not the people we've been watching on this television thing. You've evolved. And I just thought that was brilliant. So I thought it was a great premise, well handled, and very surrealistic. And I like surrealism, you know? That's what I liked about the original Outer Limits. Some of those episodes were so surreal. I don't accept it right away. The first time I'm a kid wanting my typical Star Trek, I want my McDonald's burger to taste like all my Big Macs. They're all the same. And that's what I like about them. But then as our tastes get a little more refined, as we get older, I start looking at that episode as being a special treat.
Mark, have you seen the TOS remasters that CBS did?
Yeah.
And what is your opinion of the remasters?
I think they're very good, but I like the original effects for many of the Star Trek episodes because you have a 11-foot 2-inch tangible thing there in the model of that Enterprise that the camera is moving past. So it's a very real thing that's passing us. it feels real because it is real. Where when I watch Star Trek now, it feels like animation when I see the flybys because it is animation. So I like the original effects, but they did have their limitations.
Mm-hmm.
So if all we're going to see in an episode, and I've got the Blu-rays, if all we're going to see is a flyby or the Enterprise orbiting a planet, I'll watch the original. And that's the great thing about the remasters is you can choose.
Yeah, on the Blu-rays. Yeah.
You get both versions on the Blu-ray. So if I know it's an episode that only has orbiting shots and flyby shots, I'll watch the original because it's beautiful, man. Almost 12 feet long. It's real. It's beautiful. You can touch it. But if it's an episode like Doomsday Machine
Mm-hmm.
or something like that,
or The Ultimate Computer,
yeah, then I'll watch the remastered because they're doing so much more with it. Or even Charlie X. In the opening of Charlie X and Kirk's voiceover, Captain's Log, he says, we're pulling up alongside the Antares, but we never see that because they didn't have time to do it and they didn't have the money to do it.
Right.
So they just let you assume the Antares was in the other direction. It's not in the shot, but it's there. Well, now in the remastered version, we get to see the Antares as it pulls up next to it. So Charlie X, you want to watch the remastered. Doomsday Machine, watch the remastered, you know? But for some of the episodes, the original is probably fine. I would imagine Spectre of the Gun were probably good with the original, I would imagine. But I'd be curious to look and see, because they do blow up that probe, so it might look better on the remastered version.
All right, very good.
Worth having. If you don't have them, go get them. Go get the Blu-ray box set, all 3 seasons of the original series, where you have both the original and the remastered version, and you can pick. And you also, I think, have the trailers on there for each episode.
They're fantastic. The whole Blu-ray set is really worth getting for sure, because you don't have that in the world of streaming, right? All that bonus material and switching back and forth between the episodes and all that.
You don't. You don't even get the ending credits when you're streaming. You got to be really quick because it always cuts them off, and you got to go over and click on play the end credits. Well, if you're really enjoying a show, you're kind of spellbound. You're not quick to pick up your remote and, I want the end credits. I want the Desi logo to come up. Yeah, very good. I wish the NBC logo was in there. The following color is brought to you. The show is brought to you in living color.
Oh, with the peacock.
I wish that was in there.
The old peacock logo. Yeah. If I can find that, I'll put up a link to that on the show notes page.
I suggested that to somebody at CBS who was putting together that box set. He said, good idea. I like that idea. And then he got back to me and he said, can't do it. CBS doesn't want the NBC logo in there.
Well, as you can imagine. Yeah. But I'm sure it's available online if people want to take a look at it. Mark, as we sit here in 2021, you have a history with Star Trek going back to the 60s. You've been watching the show your whole life. You've had success as a writer, of course, writing many, many scripts and other things. But nevertheless, you've always been working within the world of Star Trek, working on these books, doing all the archival research and writing these huge sets of novels. Not novels, but research books. As I sit here, I'm looking at the stack. I want to say it's about 18 inches high off the tabletop of books. So each one of them being hundreds of pages of research on this. So it's very clear to me that Star Trek is something that is very close to you and has been a big part of your life. Why does Star Trek matter to you?
It's my all-time favorite TV show, the original Star Trek. From the second episode I saw, I love the first one I saw, but by the second episode, as I told you, I was hooked. Nothing's ever surpassed it. I love Breaking Bad. I love Better Call Saul. I love Monk. There's been lots of great shows over the years that I really like, but nothing's ever been as good as the original Star Trek to me, on a writing level, an imagination level, a thematic level, the themes of the stories, acting, everything, the whole package. And it inspired me to become a screenwriter more than anything else. So, I don't watch it frequently. I'll bring that Blu-ray box out, once every 3 or 4, 5 years. And I don't see Star Trek for 5 years, and then I'll sit and I'll watch it. And I'll start to feel it's time. It's time. I'm ready. I may forget something in one of the episodes. It'll be fun to see again. So it's just I just think it's a brilliant episode series, and it taught me so much about writing and how to write well and how to have a purpose to your writing.
Mm-hmm.
A point to what you're trying to say. Fell in love with those characters. Spock, we'd never seen a character on television like him, and who can't relate to him? We all have internal conflicts, especially when you're a teenager. And here's a character who's going through the mother of internal conflicts. So, nobody's done better. Some shows have come close. I just mentioned a few. There's been some really good series over the years. But Star Trek is still, I think the original Star Trek is still as good as television gets.
Well, Mark, I've enjoyed our conversation, but I have to tell you that the M5 is signaling me that it is now time for the Kobayashi Maru.
All right.
The Kobayashi Maru is a challenging and difficult test, cunningly prepared by the M5. Should you not only survive the test, but pass it as well, the M5 will award you an honorary Star Trek title on behalf of our little show. Are you ready, Mark?
I'm ready.
All right, M5, load the Kobayashi Maru simulation and prepare to record our guests' responses.
Loading simulation.
Take a ride on the USS Constellation or take a ride on the USS Exeter?
I think probably the Exeter. The Constellation didn't have a very pleasant ending.
Hang out with Sulu in the botany lab or hang out with Scotty in the engine room?
I would rather hang out with Scotty in the engine room. And I know some fun stuff was going on in the botany lab, but Scotty just, he could teach you how to run a ship.
Which of these two characters is worse, John Gill or Kodos?
John Gill.
Choose your first Starfleet assignment. Do you want to patrol the Gorn border or the Tholian border?
Gorn. You can at least see you can see what you're up against.
Have a beverage. Will it be Tranya or the Georgia mint julep?
Tranya.
I hope you relish it as much as I. Okay, simulation complete. M5, please compute the results and tell us if our guest has passed the Kobayashi Maru.
Analyzing results.
I love those because, like John Gill or
Kodos,
they both have blood on their hands, don't they? So
yeah, they're both terrible.
Yeah, it was John Gill was like, you idiot. How could you possibly think introducing the Nazi culture to this society is going to turn out good? Kodos, you could at least understand why he did what he did, even if it was something you and I would never do. You could at least understand his thinking. But John Gill was like, well, you moron. Don't we have a lot of John Gills right now in political office? It seems like we do. Boy, what a numbskull he was.
Well, that's the great thing about the Kobayashi Maru, Mark, is that there are no-win questions. The whole point is they're not supposed to be good choices, right? So, I mean, obviously, you don't want to be John Gill, you don't want to be Kodos, you don't want to be any of these people, but, I'm asking you to say who's worse. It's certainly a thought-provoking question.
They are, very much so.
All right. Well, I am pleased to tell you that the M5 has determined that you have passed the Kobayashi Maru simulation. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And now, the M5, who has analyzed your answers, will award you an honorary Star Trek title on behalf of our podcast. M5, what title shall we award our guest?
Mark is awarded the title of Special Lecturer on Federation History at the Memory Alpha Complex.
So, there you go.
All right.
Mark, please tell our listeners how they can get in touch with you or follow you or see what you're up to if they want to continue the conversation.
Well, I have a website, marccushman.com. It's MarcCushman.com, and you can write to me through there. There's a button somewhere where you can send me a letter, and I do respond. If anybody ever wrote to me and I didn't respond, it was because for a while I wasn't getting them. And then my webmaster fixed it. So now I'm getting the messages again. So that's how you can get in touch with me. Jacobs Brown Media Group is my publisher for the most part. I did a book for another publisher too, but they do all the Star Trek books and the Irwin Allen books and so forth. So they're all there. And if you want to get a signed copy, and if you want to get a bookmarker, a matching bookmarker, there's volume 2 of the 1970s book. Flip it over. There's volume 3. You can't get those from Amazon. and you can't get a signed book from Amazon. So I would say go to jacobsbrownmediagroup.com or theseavoyagesbooks.com, and you can get them signed and you can get bookmarkers. So that's how you get in touch, and that's how you stay in touch.
Fantastic. Well, I'll put pictures to all that because I have the bookmarks and all of that. So I'll put pictures up, and we will link to all of that in the show notes page up at TrekProfiles.com. Marc, thank you so much for being part of Trek Profiles.
John, this was a lot of fun. And I love the test at the end, especially. Thank you.
Here ends this installment of the Trek Profiles podcast. And before we offer a Trek quote to close this episode, I'd like to remind you that you may send us your considered opinions, your feisty flames of conflict, or pages and pages of your nerdy pack-led fanfic to us at feedback@trekprofiles.com or on Facebook or Twitter @TrekProfiles. Anything you send me can be used in the show, or it may be sold to the Emerald Chain for scrap. This week, I leave you with a quote from Mr. Spock, who in the episode This Side of Paradise said, quote, "I am what I am, Layla, and if there are self-made purgatories and we all have to live in them, mine can be no worse than someone else's." Close quote. Thanks for listening, and live long and prosper. I came across this in my research. I got to ask you this: Did you really get involved with a series of adult sci-fi films, or was that apocryphal?
Yeah.
What was that about, man?
That's me. No, I'll tell you. I think it was 1987.
Okay.
When I wrote my first books, and there may have been a Writers Guild strike going on, so nobody was working. And I'd written a horror movie for this guy called Lovers Slain, and he needed to raise completion money. And I didn't know it, but this guy had done some adult movies. He was a producer back in the golden era, when they were doing John Holmes and people like that in the Pussycat theaters. And so he decided he was going to go out. He was going to go out and do a couple. You could have asked me this on the show. I'll talk about anything. He decided he was going to go do a couple to raise up completion money for this horror film. And he said, "Will you write the scripts?" And I said, "Sure." I've never done one, but I need five sex scenes, and I need about a 40-page script that connects everything. And he says, "But everything's got to be, there needs to be a reason for any of the nudity or the sex, or else we'll get banned. We can't air it on Spice or Playboy Channel and so forth. So, and we can't shoot it in LA or we'll get busted. But if we have a script, we won't, because they're acting, So they said, "Well, what do you pay?" So $1,500. I'm on. So I went and wrote the script and gave it to him. Got nominated by the Adult Video News Group or something as best screenplay of the year. And suddenly my phone just started ringing. And all these other directors started calling me, saying, "Hey, you can write these?" And I said, "Yeah." And so I just started doing them whenever I was between other jobs or when we were on strike, and that happened a few times over the years. I would do these things and make money. And especially, it's funny, when I got married and had a son, my wife said, "You're not making enough money as a writer. So you need to do more of these adult things, because you're always getting phone calls for this stuff, but you're not doing them. And we could use the money." So it was my wife who told me to do more. But I got to tell you this. Gene Roddenberry told me, he said, "One day somebody's going to do an X-rated version of Star Trek." And so I did it. He was looking forward to it. He said, "And I want to see it." So I said, "Okay." So I did Sex Trek, the final orgasm, and I did Sex Trek, the next penetration. There were a couple of them.
And did Gene ever get back to you with his opinion on these?
What year did he pass away?
It was the early 90s. I want to
Yeah,
say 92, 93, something like that.
It's like these books, I didn't do them quick enough. You know, he was gone before I did these books. Gave me so much to work with, and you know, he had been dead 10 years before the first book came out. But I could always sense him looking over my shoulder when I was writing them. No, that's wrong. You know, it's like he's giving
change that.
He was giving me stuff. I'm serious. I mean, I really felt like he was there because I'm living in his memos. I'd interviewed him. I knew so much, you know, and about him and what he felt. And so I would feel like sometimes you pause when you're writing, you're kind of trying to think of, did I get that right? And it was almost like somebody would say yes or no in my ear. And then I went into the office not long after that, and there was a picture on the wall at Roddenberry Enterprises, picture on the wall of him standing there looking over Susan Sackett's shoulder when they had their first computer, office computer,
right,
little Capro or something. And he's leaning in, looking over her shoulder. And that's what I always had in my mind when I was writing these books. And I walked in and I saw that picture and it was like, good God, that sent a chill up my spine. And I called Susan and I said, that picture, that's what I felt like he was there looking over my shoulder when I was doing this. But back to the X-rated stuff. So he had passed away by then, because I think I did, I think it was around 96 or 97 when I did those. Mm-hmm. And I directed those as well. So he was gone by then. But Mike Pillar saw them. He got a kick out of them because I came in to pitch to him once at Next Generation. And he said, so Mark, what have you been up to lately? And I said, I just did a low budget film with Elliot Gould and whatever. And he said, oh, have you done any porn? I think so. You know, he'd seen it. I think they all had, because there was a movie out called Sex Trek. Of course, if you worked for Star Trek, you had to watch the thing. And you could tell whoever wrote it was a fan. You know?
Oh, right. Yeah. They obviously must have known about it. There's
a bunch of them now, and I hear they're not too good. I don't know. I don't watch them. But the one couple I did, I think, turned out pretty good. You know, we got the costumes. We built the ship. You know, cheap version.
Oh my goodness. Well, I just had to ask you about that because I was doing my research and I was like, what? I was like, oh, I got to ask about this. So maybe I'll put that in the bonus material. I don't know. So
go ahead.
Thank you so much, Mark, for being on the show. I really enjoyed it.
You bet. It's been my pleasure. Yeah, I'll tell you one more thing about that. It's like, I've written everything. You know, I've done religious shows, children's shows, adult shows, primetime shows, movies, TV, comedy, drama, industrial films, you name it. I've never turned down a job if I had time to do it. Mm-hmm. Well, that's not true. I have turned down some, but what I meant was I would never turn down something because, oh, I don't do that. You know, it was like, well, it'll be interesting. I've never done that before. This might be interesting. So I would do them. And then I would not do jobs because I didn't like the people I was working for. Like I did some religious films, wrote under a different name, and always used different names. But I wasn't that clever with the adult stuff. The name I used was Cash Markman. So it didn't take a lot of work for the people at Star Trek to think Marc Cushman, Cash Markman. I think this could be the same guy. But I would use different names because I'm a guild writer. So if you're moonlighting, you could come up with different names for this stuff. And the one company I was doing religious films for, they were really prejudiced. Not racially prejudiced, but prejudiced against other religions.
Okay.
And they wanted me to work that in the script. If you don't believe in what we believe, you're going to go to hell. And I said, you go to hell. I'm not going to write that. You know, so I would turn jobs down for that reason.
Okay.
It just ethically rubbed me wrong. But doing adult didn't rub me wrong because I agree with Gene. Sex is a very natural thing. I just made sure that any scripts I did treated women respectfully. You know, and if they were for broadcast, and all mine were, you had to anyway. But I would have anyway, because you have to, when it's broadcast, you can't demean women. And there's a lot of taboos. You can't do drugs. You can't do a lot of things that you can do on regular TV. You can't do in adult movies. If you want that movie to be broadcast in Europe or on Playboy Channel or something, you got to go by the rules. I'm not talking about the junk on the internet, where they're mistreating women horribly. But the stuff we did was always very couples friendly, very respectful of women, very story driven. And I had fun doing those because they would call me up and say, yeah, we need a couple movies next month. Go write whatever you want. Can I do a Star Trek parody? Sure. And so I could whatever I was in the mood to write, whether it was a drama or a comedy, a takeoff, a parody, whatever I was in the mood to write that week, I could do. And the money was good and very little rewriting. They would send it through legal because it was going to be broadcast, and sometimes they'd come back. But after you do a few of those, just like after I did several diagnosis murders or whatever, they never had to change anything because I knew how to not. I knew what the broadcast rules were, so I knew you can't use these words, you can't go here. So I learned that with the adult stuff too. So every now and then they would come back and say, "No, you need to take this out," but usually not. So it was like I would do 2 drafts and I'm out, but there's my check and I'm on my way home. So it was fun. It was easy. It was creative, and everybody was treated well in my scripts. There was always positive messages and sex. So I enjoy doing them. I don't do them now because the industry's changed. They don't, they'll call me up and they'll say, "Can you do a script?" I'll say, "How many pages?" And when I started, they wanted 40-page script. I mean, it was a proper script. It was like writing a half-hour TV episode that would be an hour long because there'd be undressing scenes, right? Now they call up and say, "No more than 8 pages." You don't need me. Anybody can do 8 pages. You can't do a proper story in 8 pages. You can't do a character arc. You can't have a theme. It's literally just a setup to a sex scene, And I said, I don't want to do that. So I do turn work down because the work has gotten terrible. But when you're allowed to do quality, whether it's a kid's show or adult or whatever, if I'm allowed to do something that I feel is quality within that genre, then I'll do it. So that's how I always was. That's why I've got over 1,000 produced credits, because I would do the work. If I didn't have anything else going that week and I knew I was going to be able to put some quality into it, I would.
Well, hey, there's nothing wrong with getting work if you can get it.
Yeah.
So I appreciate that, Mark. Thank you for taking the time to talk with me. Have a great day and take it easy, man. And I'll let you know before this drops, okay?
And now I'll remember you.
All right. If I see you in the vendor's room, I'll stop by and say hi.
This time I'll know who you are. Okay, John. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye.